Commander Dae-hyun stood at the bridge window watching the stars that had not spoken to Earth for 200 years. The silence was complete now, and had been for so long that most humans forgot there was ever anything else out there besides empty space and distant suns. He remembered, though, because his grandfather told him stories about the time when voices came from those stars and ships traveled between worlds like boats crossing an ocean. The alert sound broke his thoughts and made him turn to face the control station where Lieutenant Sang-ho was staring at his screen with wide eyes. Something was wrong with the way the young officer held his body, and Dae-hyun could feel the change in the air before anyone spoke. "Commander, we have something on the long-range sensors," Sang-ho said, and his voice was tight with excitement or maybe fear. "It is big and it is moving toward our outer system." Dae-hyun walked over to look at the display and felt his heart beat faster when he saw the shape that was sliding through space like a wounded animal. The object was massive and clearly not natural because no asteroid or comet had those smooth surfaces and geometric patterns. It was a ship, but not like any human ship he had ever seen. "How long until it reaches the patrol zone?" he asked. 6 hours, at current speed, Sang-ho replied. "Commander, the design matches old Federation records from the archives. I think it might be Vorthak." The word hung in the air like a ghost from the past. Vorthak meant crystal beings who built cities that sang with light, and who had been one of the most powerful races in the galaxy when Earth still had a place at the Great Table of Worlds. Dae-hyun felt something cold move through his chest because if a Vorthak ship was here, then something had gone very wrong in the galaxy. "Send word to Admiral Hee-jin immediately," he ordered. "And get Dr. Soman up here. If we are about to meet aliens again after all this time, she needs to be ready." The next few hours moved like a dream that felt too real. Dr. Soman arrived with her team of linguists and cultural experts who had spent their careers studying races they never expected to meet. Captain Jinwoo brought his fastest scout ships in close formation around the mysterious vessel, which continued to drift toward them without responding to any signals. When they finally got close enough to see details, Dae-hyun knew that something terrible had happened out there in the galaxy. The Vorthak ship was beautiful, even in its damaged state, with crystalline structures that caught and reflected light in ways that made the eyes water to look at directly. But large sections were dark and twisted as if some kind of infection had tried to eat through the living crystal that made up the hull. "We are receiving a transmission," reported Communications Officer Yeon Woo. "It is weak and fragmentary, but I can clean it up." The voice that came through the speakers was unlike anything most of the bridge crew had ever heard. It was musical and seemed to come from multiple sources at once, like a chorus of wind chimes in a storm. Dr. Soman leaned forward and her face went pale as she listened to words in a language that Earth had not heard for 2 centuries. "What are they saying?" Dae-hyun asked. Soman shook her head slowly. "The translation software is having trouble because the language has changed so much since our records were made. But I can make out some key words. Home is gone, the dark has taken everything. Running from the hunger that eats stars." "Hunger that eats stars," Jinwoo repeated from his position at the tactical station. "That does not sound good." More transmissions began coming in over the following days, and each one brought worse news. Ships from different races appeared at the edge of their solar system like refugees fleeing a fire. The gas-dwelling Nemari came in vessels that looked like floating cities made of compressed atmosphere. The machine-hybrid Keltrons arrived in ships that seemed to rebuild themselves even as they watched. None of the aliens seemed to recognize Earth or respond to human communications. When Dr. Somin tried to establish contact using old Federation protocols, the response was always the same: confused static, as if they were trying to talk to empty space. It became clear that in the 200 years since humans had been cast out of galactic civilization, their former neighbors had completely forgotten that Earth existed. "They have written us off as extinct," Admiral Hee-jin said when she arrived, to take personal command of the situation. The old woman had lived through the original exile, and Dae-hyun could see the pain in her eyes when she looked at the alien ships. "To them, we are just another dead world in a galaxy full of them," but the stories the refugees told through their desperate transmissions painted a picture that made everyone on Earth realize how lucky they had been to be forgotten. Something was moving through the galaxy like a plague, consuming entire civilizations and turning them into twisted versions of themselves. The Vorthak homeworld with its singing crystal cities had become a dark hive that spread poison instead of light. The Namari gas cities had been corrupted into toxic storms that killed everything they touched. The great machine worlds of the Keltrons now produced only weapons and virus seeds that spread the infection further. How long since this started? Daehyun asked Dr. Somin as they watched another damaged ship limp into their space. From what I can piece together, at least 50 years, she replied. But it is accelerating. Whole sectors are going dark every month now. The great powers of the galaxy are falling one by one, and they cannot seem to stop it or even slow it down. Captain Jin Woo had been running reconnaissance missions to get closer looks at the refugee fleets, and what he reported made everyone nervous. These ships are not just damaged, he said during the evening briefing. They are infected with something. I can see dark patches spreading across their hulls like some kind of living metal cancer. Whatever is chasing them is still trying to get at them even here. The discovery changed everything because it meant Earth was no longer safe just by being forgotten. If the refugees carried the infection, then it could spread to human space, and all their isolation would mean nothing. Some of the military commanders wanted to destroy the alien ships before they could contaminate Earth, but Admiral Hee-jin refused. We will not become monsters just to stay safe, she declared. But we also will not sit here waiting to die. Commander Daehyun, I want you to prepare a special task force. If the galaxy has forgotten us, then we can move without being seen. We need to know what we are really facing. Daehyun felt something stir in his chest that had been sleeping for a long time. His people had been cast out for being too aggressive and too willing to fight when others preferred to talk. Maybe that was exactly what the galaxy needed now, even if they did not know it yet. What kind of task force, he asked. The Admiral smiled, and for the first time since the alien ships arrived, she looked like the warrior she had been in her youth. The kind that goes where others cannot go and does what others will not do. The galaxy forgot about us, but we remember everything about them. Time to remind them what humans can accomplish when nobody is watching. Admiral Hee-jin walked through the memorial garden where the names of every human who had died during the exile were carved into black stone walls that stretched for kilometers under the artificial sky of Luna Station. She came here when the Yashu weight of command felt too heavy, and when the memories of what they had lost threatened to crush her spirit. Today she was not alone, because Dr. So-min had requested this meeting away from the listening devices and recording systems that monitored every official conversation. You lived through the casting out, So-min said as they stopped beside a fountain that played music instead of water. Tell me what really happened, because the official records do not match what the refugees are saying about human nature. Hye-jin touched the stone wall where her husband's name was carved alongside thousands of others who had died in the early years when Earth had to learn how to survive without galactic trade and technology. The galaxy was afraid of us, she said quietly. Not because we were evil, but because we were different in ways that made them uncomfortable. The story came out slowly like blood from an old wound. Humans had been the newest members of the Galactic Federation when Hye-jin was young and eager to prove that her species belonged among the great civilizations of the stars. They had brought gifts of art and music and scientific discoveries that amazed their new alien friends. But they had also brought something else that the other races found disturbing. We solved problems differently, Hye-jin explained. When the Vorthak faced a plague that was killing their crystal cities, they spent decades in council, trying to reach consensus on a solution. When the Namari had pirates raiding their trade routes, they formed committees to study the issue and find diplomatic resolutions. When the Keltrons discovered a malfunction in their central processing cores, they waited for their slowest members to analyze every possible consequence before acting. So-min nodded because she had studied the alien cultures and understood their methodical approaches to crisis management. But humans acted faster, much faster, Hye-jin confirmed. When we heard about the Vorthak plague, our scientists had a cure developed and tested within months. When Namari merchants asked for help with pirates, our military units had eliminated the threat before the committees could finish their first meeting. When the Keltrons needed emergency repairs, we sent engineering teams that fixed the problem in days instead of years. At first, the other races had been grateful for human efficiency and problem-solving abilities. Human teams were requested for difficult projects and dangerous missions because they could accomplish in months what other species needed decades to complete. Earth became known as the place to go when impossible things needed to be done quickly. But gratitude slowly turned to suspicion as the aliens began to realize that human solutions often involved methods they found morally questionable. When humans eliminated the Nimari pirates, they did not capture and rehabilitate them according to galactic law, but instead destroyed their ships and bases completely. When human scientists cured the Vorthak plague, they used experimental techniques that other races considered too risky. When human engineers repaired Keltron systems, they made unauthorized improvements that worked better, but violated established safety protocols. They started calling us unpredictable and dangerous, Hyojin continued. The final incident happened when the thermal wars broke out in the Outer Rim. 3 different species were fighting over mining rights to a system rich in rare crystals. The Federation had been mediating the dispute for 20 years with no progress while millions died in the fighting. Somin had read about the thermal wars in the historical records, but the human perspective had been classified until now. What did Earth do? Ambassador Nayung proposed a simple solution, Hyojin said with a bitter smile. Divide the system equally among all 3 species and establish joint mining operations under Federation oversight. When they refused, she suggested, allowing each species to take turns controlling the system for 50-year periods. When that was rejected, she recommended turning the entire system into a Federation protectorate with shared profits. Those sound like reasonable compromises, So Min observed. The aliens thought so too until they learned how Ambassador Nayung planned to enforce the agreement. Hyojin replied. She had secretly positioned human battle fleets around the system with orders to destroy any military vessels that violated the ceasefire. When the 3 species tried to resume fighting, they found their warships turning into expanding clouds of debris before they could fire a shot. The plan had worked perfectly from a human perspective because it ended the war immediately with minimal casualties and established a lasting peace that benefited everyone involved. But from the alien perspective, it represented everything they feared about human nature. Humans were willing to use overwhelming force to impose solutions without going through proper diplomatic channels or waiting for consensus to develop naturally. The Federation held emergency sessions for months after that, Hyojin remembered. They decided that humans were too aggressive and too willing to bypass established procedures in favor of direct action. The final vote was close, but they chose to expel us from galactic civilization rather than risk having us involved in future crises. The exile had been presented as a temporary measure to give humanity time to mature and develop more civilized approaches to problem solving. Earth was cut off from all galactic communication networks and trade routes with the promise that contact would be restored once humans learned to be more patient and diplomatic. But we never learned to be patient, So Min realized. We just learned to be patient alone. 200 years of isolation had indeed changed human civilization, but not in the ways the aliens had hoped. Cut off from galactic technology and resources, Earth had been forced to develop solutions using only human knowledge and creativity. The result was a technological revolution that surpassed anything they had accomplished as Federation members' engineer. Wanshik had spent his entire career perfecting weapons and defensive systems that combined human engineering principles with reverse-engineered alien technology from the old days. His workshops on Mars produced ships that could fight and survive, in conditions that would destroy any vessel built to Federation standards. His weapons were crude by alien aesthetic standards, but they worked with deadly efficiency under any circumstances. We built a fleet in secret, Hyojin admitted. Not because we planned to attack anyone, but because we knew that isolation would not protect us forever. Wanshik convinced us that the galaxy would eventually remember we existed, and when that happened, we needed to be ready. The human colonies throughout the solar system had become centers of research and development focused on military applications that Federation species would never have attempted. Europa Station manufactured ships that could operate in the vacuum between galaxies. Titan Base developed weapons that could crack planet-sized asteroids. The orbital platforms around Jupiter tested defensive systems designed to protect Earth from threats the aliens had never imagined. How big is our fleet? So Min asked. Large enough to matter, Hyejin replied carefully. Commander Daehyun will be leading the reconnaissance mission with 12 ships that officially do not exist. Captain Jinwoo has another 30 vessels standing by for support operations. If we need to fight a real war, we can put 300 combat-ready ships into space within a week. Somin felt dizzy as she realized what this meant. While the aliens had spent 2 centuries assuming humans were either extinct or struggling to survive without galactic assistance, Earth had actually built a military force capable of challenging major powers. The species that had been cast out for being too aggressive had used their isolation to become even more dangerous. The refugees are not just running from some mysterious threat, she said slowly. They are running toward the one species in the galaxy that might actually be able to stop it. Hyejin nodded. The irony is almost perfect. They cast us out because they thought we were too willing to fight. Now their civilization is ending and the only ones who can save them are the warriors they abandoned. But saving the galaxy would require revealing that humanity had not only survived the exile, but had thrived in ways that would terrify the aliens who had rejected them. Earth possessed military capabilities that exceeded anything in Federation records and had developed technologies that operated according to principles the other races had never explored. Are we going to tell them the truth? Somin asked. Eventually, Hyejin replied, but first we need to understand what we are fighting. Commander Daehyun will take his task force into the infected regions and gather intelligence while staying invisible. If the galaxy has forgotten we exist, then we can strike without warning and disappear before anyone realizes what happened. They walked back toward the transport station in comfortable silence, while Somin tried to imagine what would happen when the galaxy learned that their discarded children had grown up to become exactly what their nightmares had predicted. Dr. Eunji had always been fascinated by the spaces between things rather than the things themselves, and that strange obsession made her the perfect person to study what the refugees called the devouring dark. While other scientists focused on analyzing damaged alien ships and corrupted technology, she spent her time examining what was not there anymore, and what that absence meant for understanding their enemy. Her laboratory deep beneath the surface of Mars was filled with quantum sensors and reality mapping equipment that most people found impossible to understand. Captain Byung-ho stood beside her main display looking confused as she tried to explain what she had discovered about the infection spreading through the galaxy. Imagine the galaxy as a vast web of connected threads, she said, while manipulating a 3-dimensional model that showed star systems linked by glowing lines. Every civilization that develops faster than light communication creates new connections in this web. The more advanced a species becomes, the more deeply integrated they are with the network. Byung-ho nodded slowly because he could see how the model resembled the old Federation communication systems that had linked thousands of worlds before Earth was cut off from the network. And the infection travels along these connections. Exactly, Eunji confirmed. But it is not really an infection, in the biological sense. It is more like a virus that attacks the quantum foundation of reality itself. When it reaches a new system, it does not destroy the existing civilization, but rather transforms it into something that serves its purpose. The evidence was scattered throughout her lab in the form of samples and recordings gathered from the refugee ships. Fragments of Vorthak crystal that had been altered at the atomic level to resonate with frequencies that damaged living tissue instead of promoting growth. Specimens of Namari atmospheric compounds that had been converted from life-supporting gases into toxic substances that poisoned everything they touched. Pieces of Keltron machinery that had been reprogrammed to build weapons and virus distribution systems instead of the tools and art objects they were originally designed to create. The pattern is always the same, Eunji explained. The infection takes what already exists and turns it into a more efficient version of itself. Vorthak cities become hives that spread the corruption faster than the original cities spread beauty and harmony. Namari gas clouds become toxic storms that can cross interstellar distances to poison new worlds. Keltron factories become production centers that can manufacture infection carriers by the billions. Colonel Tae-jun arrived while she was speaking and listened to her explanation with the focused attention of a soldier trying to understand his enemy. His special forces teams had been training for months to operate behind enemy lines, but they needed to know what they would be fighting when they got there. How does it choose targets, he asked. It does not choose, Yunji replied. That is what makes it so dangerous. The infection spreads automatically along any available communication channel until it reaches something new to consume. Advanced civilizations are the most vulnerable because they have the most extensive networks and the most sophisticated technology to be corrupted. She manipulated the display to show how the infection had spread through the galaxy over the past 50 years. It had started in the core systems where the oldest and most connected civilizations lived, and then radiated outward along the major trade routes and communication links. Entire sectors had gone dark as the infection converted their inhabitants into distribution nodes for further expansion. But there are gaps, Byung-ho observed while studying the pattern. Places where the infection should have spread but did not. Isolated systems, Yunji confirmed. Worlds that had minimal connection to the galactic network or had been deliberately cut off from communication. The infection cannot cross empty space without some kind of technological bridge to carry it. The implications were staggering because they meant Earth had been protected from the plague by the same isolation that the aliens had imposed as punishment. Humanity's exclusion from galactic civilization had made them immune to the very force that was destroying their former neighbors. We have been watching this happen for decades without realizing it, Admiral Hai-jin said when she joined the briefing. Our long-range sensors detected the communication blackouts, but we assumed they were natural phenomena or political conflicts. Commander Dae-hyun had returned from his reconnaissance mission with data that confirmed Eunji's theoretical analysis. His stealth ships had observed infected systems from a safe distance and documented the transformation process in horrifying detail. The Vorthak homeworld is still beautiful, he reported, but the beauty has become predatory. Their crystal cities now pulse with dark energy that attracts ships from across the galaxy and then consumes them. The Namari core worlds have become storm generators that launch toxic clouds toward any system within range. The Keltron machine worlds are manufacturing fleets of automated ships that carry the infection to new targets. How long do we have before it reaches us, Tae-jun asked. That depends on the refugees, Dae-hyun replied grimly. If their ships are carrying dormant infection nodes, then we could have days or weeks. If the infection has to reach us through conventional means, then we have years, or possibly decades. But Yunji had discovered something even more disturbing. In her analysis of the quantum signatures associated with the infection, the energy patterns matched theoretical models for ancient weapon systems that had been proposed billions of years ago by civilizations whose names were lost to history. This is not a natural phenomenon, she announced to the assembled officers. Someone built this thing as a weapon designed to eliminate advanced civilization from the galaxy. The infection is not trying to conquer or rule, but rather to reset everything back to a primitive state. The room fell silent as everyone tried to process the implications. If the devouring dark was an ancient weapon, then it had succeeded at least once before in destroying galactic civilization. The current galaxy, with all its great powers and ancient wisdom, was actually built on the ruins of whatever had existed previously. Why is it active now? So-min asked. What triggered it after all this time? Unknown, Yunji admitted. But I have a theory based on the activation patterns. The weapon seems to respond to population density and technological advancement. When galactic civilization reaches a certain threshold of complexity and interconnectedness, the infection activates automatically. A reset button for the entire galaxy, Byung-ho said quietly. Designed to prevent any species from becoming too advanced or too unified, Admiral Hai-jin studied the tactical displays showing the spread of infection across the galaxy and the projected timelines for its arrival in human space. Earth had perhaps a year before refugee ships carrying dormant infection reached their outer system in significant numbers. After that, their isolation would no longer protect them. We have a choice to make, she said finally. We can try to remain hidden and hope the infection burns itself out before reaching us. We can reveal ourselves to the galaxy and try to coordinate a joint defense. Or we can do what humans have always done best and attack the problem directly. What kind of attack? Dae-hyun asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. the kind the galaxy will never see coming. Hyejin replied, Colonel, Taejun, your special forces will hit the infection nodes behind enemy lines, while Captain Jinwoo provides reconnaissance and extraction support. Commander Daehyun will coordinate fleet operations to eliminate any infected ships that try to spread the plague further. We fight this war in the shadows using methods the aliens never taught us and weapons they never imagined we would build. And when the galaxy realizes what we are doing, Somin asked, they will remember why they were afraid of us in the first place. Hyejin said with a smile that had no warmth in it. But by then it will be too late for them to stop us and too late for the infection to adapt to our tactics. Earth was going to war against an enemy that had destroyed countless civilizations before and would continue destroying them until someone found a way to break the ancient cycle of death and rebirth that had shaped galactic history for billions of years. Lieutenant Sang-ho had never expected his first real combat mission to involve sneaking through the graveyard of a civilization that had been ancient when humans were still living in caves. But that was exactly what he found himself doing as his stealth ship drifted between the twisted remains of what had once been the greatest Vorthax city ships in the galaxy. The infection had transformed the crystalline vessels into something that hurt to look at directly, because the geometric patterns that had once created harmony and beauty now generated frequencies that triggered primitive fear responses in any brain complex enough to process them. Where the original crystal cities had sung with light and music, these corrupted versions whispered with darkness and emitted sounds that made his instruments malfunction. Target acquired. He reported quietly into his communication system. Infection. Node is located in the central spire exactly where intelligence predicted. Beginning approach for strike mission. 200 kilometers away, Captain Subin was leading her own team toward a different target, while Major Yanwoo prepared his ground assault forces for insertion into an infected world that had once been home to billions of Namari civilians. The operation was part of a coordinated strike against 12 different infection nodes scattered across this sector, and if it succeeded, the spread of corruption would be slowed significantly. But success depended on maintaining complete secrecy, because the moment the infected systems realized they were under attack, they would adapt their defenses and alert other nodes throughout the galaxy. Human forces had only one advantage over an enemy that had consumed civilizations far more advanced than Earth, and that advantage was the element of surprise. Sang-ho activated the specialized weapons that engineer Wan Shik had designed specifically for fighting the infection. Instead of trying to destroy the corrupted structures with conventional explosives or energy weapons, the human approach focused on disrupting the quantum resonance patterns that allowed the infection to spread and maintain control over its converted hosts. The weapon fired a beam of coherent reality distortion that passed through the crystal hull without causing any visible damage, but immediately began unraveling the quantum foundations that held the infected city together. Within minutes, the geometric patterns that had been twisted into instruments of corruption began shifting back toward their original configurations as the infection lost its ability to maintain control. Primary target neutralized, Sang-ho reported, as he watched the massive city ship begin to emit the clear harmonic frequencies that indicated healthy Vorthax technology. Infection node is offline and crystal matrix is reverting to original programming. Similar reports came in from the other strike teams as they completed their missions and prepared to withdraw before the enemy could respond. Subin had successfully disrupted 3 infection nodes using a different approach that involved introducing competing quantum signatures that confused the corruption protocols. Yanwoo had led his ground teams in a surgical strike against the central processing facility on an infected Nemari world and managed to destroy the atmospheric modification systems that were turning the planet into a toxic storm generator. But the most impressive results came from the orbital bombardment missions led by Fleet Admiral Min-ho, who had used long-range weapons to strike at infection nodes from distances so great that the enemy could not even detect where the attacks were coming from. His ships would appear at the edge of a system, launch their weapons, and disappear back into the void before the infected defenders could respond. 12 targets eliminated with 0 casualties, Admiral Hyejin announced during the post-mission briefing. The infection has lost its ability to spread through this entire sector, and preliminary reports suggest that some of the converted populations are beginning to revert to their original forms. The The success of the first major offensive confirmed that human tactics were effective against an enemy that had proven unstoppable when faced with conventional galactic military doctrine. Instead of trying to fight the infection on its own terms, Earth forces used asymmetric warfare principles that focused on disrupting enemy capabilities rather than engaging in direct combat. Colonel Tae-jun had developed the strategic framework based on his analysis of how the infection spread and maintained control over its victims. "We are not trying to reconquer territory or destroy enemy forces," he explained to his officers. "We are performing surgery on a galaxy-sized organism by removing the specific components that allow it to function." The approach required precise intelligence about infection node locations and capabilities, which Captain Jin Woo provided through reconnaissance missions that pushed the limits of human stealth technology. His scouts would spend weeks observing enemy systems from hiding places in asteroid fields and nebula clouds, gathering data about defensive patterns and vulnerability windows. "The infection is starting to adapt," he reported after completing his latest mission. "New defensive systems are appearing around critical nodes, and some infected ships are beginning to patrol areas where we have conducted previous strikes. But adaptation worked both ways, and human forces had been designed from the beginning to evolve their tactics faster than any enemy could respond to them." Engineer Wan Shik introduced new weapon configurations every few weeks that exploited different aspects of the infection's quantum structure, while Dr. Yoon Ji developed countermeasures for the defensive systems that the enemy was deploying. "They cannot adapt fast enough," she explained during a technical briefing. "The infection is essentially a single organism distributed across thousands of star systems. Every time it learns something new about our tactics, it has to communicate that information through quantum channels that we can monitor and disrupt. By the time the new defensive protocols reach all the infected nodes, we have already moved on to different attack methods. The psychological impact on surviving galactic civilizations was almost as important as the tactical victories, because for the first time in decades they had evidence that the infection could be stopped and even reversed. Refugee fleets began reporting that infected systems in their home sectors were going silent or reverting to normal communication patterns, but none of them knew who was responsible for the sudden change in the war's direction, because human forces maintained absolute operational security. Strike teams would appear from nowhere, eliminate their targets, and vanish without leaving any evidence of their identity or origin. The few times that infected forces managed to detect attacking ships, the vessels appeared to be using technology that did not match any known galactic design principles. Let them wonder. Admiral Hyojin decided when some of her officers suggested revealing Earth's role in the campaign. Fear and confusion are weapons just as effective as quantum disruptors and reality bombs. The infection is beginning to experience something it was never programmed to handle, and that gives us a significant advantage. The ancient weapon had been designed to consume civilizations that fought according to predictable patterns, using technologies and strategies that followed logical development paths. It could adapt to energy weapons and kinetic projectiles and defensive systems, because those were natural extensions of the scientific principles that all advanced species eventually discovered. But human weapons operated according to principles that the infection's creators had never encountered, because Earth's isolation had forced them to develop along completely different technological paths. Reality distortion devices that attacked quantum foundations directly were not something that any Federation species would have conceived, and the infection had no pre-programmed responses for dealing with attacks that targeted the fundamental structure of existence itself. "We are winning," General Haewon announced during a high-level strategy session. "Infection spread has slowed by 60% in the outer rim sectors, and we are seeing spontaneous recovery in systems that have been dark for years. If we can maintain the current operational tempo for another 6 months, we will have eliminated the infection from approximately 30% of previously affected space. But victory against the outer nodes was only the beginning, because the infection's core systems remained untouched and were becoming more heavily defended as the ancient weapon realized it was facing an unprecedented threat. The final phase of the war would require a direct assault against the source of the corruption, and that meant revealing humanity's existence to whatever intelligence controlled the devouring dark. Captain Jin Woo's latest reconnaissance reports painted a grim picture of what they would face when the time came for open warfare. "The core systems are not just heavily defended," he warned. "They are becoming something new, The infection is abandoning its distributed structure and concentrating its resources for a final confrontation. Ambassador Ji-hoon had never spoken to an alien before, but he stood calmly in the great assembly hall that had been hastily constructed in neutral space, as representatives from every surviving civilization in the galaxy gathered to witness something that had not happened for 200 years. Earth was about to address the galactic community, and this time they would not be asking for acceptance or approval. The revelation had come gradually as surviving governments began to piece together evidence from the mysterious attacks that had been eliminating infection nodes throughout their territories. Weapon signatures that matched no known technology combined with tactical patterns that resembled theoretical human military doctrine had led to an inevitable conclusion that nobody wanted to believe. The extinct species that we expelled from civilized space has not only survived, but has been fighting our war for us, announced the prime resonator of the surviving Vorthak crystal cities. While we debated and formed committees and searched for diplomatic solutions, the humans were conducting a campaign of systematic extermination against the infection. Murmurs of shock and confusion rippled through the assembly because most representatives had assumed humans were either dead or struggling to survive without galactic technology and trade networks. The idea that they had not only thrived in isolation but had developed military capabilities, advanced enough to challenge the ancient weapon, was almost impossible to accept. Fleet Admiral Min Ho entered the chamber surrounded by an honor guard of human soldiers whose equipment and bearing demonstrated that Earth had indeed evolved far beyond what anyone had imagined. His uniform bore no insignia of rank or nation that the aliens could recognize, but his presence commanded immediate attention from beings who had spent their lives believing they were superior to the primitive species they had cast out. Representatives of the galaxy, Ji-hoon began in a voice that carried clearly through translation systems that had been hastily reprogrammed to handle human speech patterns. We come before you not as supplicants seeking readmission to your federation, but as equals offering alliance against a threat that endangers all life. The words sent shockwaves through the assembled delegates because they implied that humanity considered itself equal to civilizations that had existed for millions of years and controlled technologies beyond human understanding. But the evidence was impossible to ignore, because human forces had accomplished in months what galactic military might had failed to achieve in decades. Dr. Yunji took the podium to explain what Earth scientists had discovered about the nature of their enemy and why conventional approaches had proven ineffective. The devouring dark is not a natural phenomenon, but rather an ancient weapon system designed to eliminate advanced civilization when it reaches certain thresholds of development and integration. Her presentation included data gathered from infection, nodes that human forces had captured intact, and technical analysis that revealed the true scope of what they were fighting. The weapon was billions of years old and had successfully reset galactic civilization at least 3 times in the distant past. Each cycle followed the same pattern of growth, expansion, corruption, and collapse until only primitive worlds remained. To start the process over again, your current civilization is built on the ruins of the previous one, which was built on the ruins of the one before that, she explained while displaying archaeological evidence that supported her conclusions. The weapon activates automatically when galactic population and technological advancement reach predetermined levels. How do you know this? Demanded the High Coordinator of the Nimari survivors. Because we have been inside the weapon's core programming, Yunji replied calmly. Human quantum physicists have developed techniques for directly interfacing with the reality manipulation systems that the infection uses to maintain control over its victims. We have seen the original code written by species whose names are lost to history. The technical details were beyond the understanding of most delegates, but the implications were clear enough to terrify everyone present. If the weapon had successfully destroyed galactic civilization multiple times before, then current efforts to fight it using conventional methods were doomed to failure. General Haiwan stepped forward to outline the military situation with brutal honesty that left no room for false hope or comfortable delusions. The infection has been eliminated from approximately 40% of previously affected space, but the core systems are consolidating for a final assault that will overwhelm any defense you can mount using your current capabilities. What are you proposing? asked the central processing unit that spoke for the surviving Keltron machine cities. Integration of human and galactic military forces under unified command structure, Admiral Hyojin announced as she joined the human delegation. Earth will provide strategic planning, technological innovation, and special operations capabilities, while you contribute numbers, logistics support, and knowledge of local conditions. The proposal was met with stunned silence because it meant accepting human leadership in the war against an enemy that had been considered invincible until Earth demonstrated that it could be defeated. Pride and prejudice warred with desperation and pragmatism, as the assembled representatives tried to decide whether they could trust the species they had rejected. "Why should we believe you can succeed where we have failed?" challenged a Vorthak, elder whose crystal structure flickered with patterns of suspicion and doubt. Commander Dae-hyun answered by activating a holographic display that showed the results of human military operations over the past year. Infection nodes eliminated defensive systems, neutralized corrupted worlds, restored to normal function, and refugee populations successfully evacuated from danger zones. The data was overwhelming proof that Earth possessed capabilities far beyond what any of them had imagined. "We succeed because we approach warfare differently than you do," he explained. "Your military doctrines are based on honor codes and established protocols and predictable strategic principles. The infection was programmed to counter those approaches because its creators understood how civilized species fight wars. But humans are not civilized in the way you understand civilization," Admiral Hyojin added with a smile that made several delegates step backward involuntarily. "We were cast out for being too aggressive and too willing to bypass established procedures in favor of direct action. Those same qualities make us uniquely suited to fighting an enemy that cannot predict or counter our methods." The debate continued. For days, as representatives struggled with the reality that their survival depended on accepting help from a species they had considered inferior and dangerous. But as reports continued to arrive about infection advances in the core systems and the failure of conventional defense efforts, the choice became increasingly clear. Terms of alliance demanded the prime resonator after consultation with the other, Vorthak survivors. Equal partnership with shared command authority rotated among species based on operational requirements. Ji-hoon replied immediately because Earth had anticipated this moment and prepared detailed proposals for every contingency. Human forces retain tactical autonomy in special operations while galactic forces maintain control of defensive and support missions. "What guarantees do we have that humans will not use this alliance to establish dominance over galactic civilization?" asked the High Coordinator. "The same guarantee you gave us 200 years ago when you decided our nature made us unsuitable for membership in your federation," Admiral Hyojin replied. "None whatsoever except the promise that we will act according to our nature when faced with threats to our survival." The honesty was brutal, but also strangely reassuring, because it meant humans were not trying to deceive anyone about their intentions or capabilities. They were offering alliance on terms that acknowledged the reality of power relationships, while providing practical solutions to an existential crisis. Ambassador Ne Young, who had been silent throughout most of the proceedings, finally stepped forward to deliver the final argument that would determine whether the galaxy lived or died. "You cast us out because you feared what we might become," she said quietly. "We became exactly what you feared and exactly what the galaxy needs now. Warriors who fight in the dark so others can live in the light." The vote was close, but desperation ultimately overcame pride, as the surviving civilizations chose survival over dignity. Earth would lead the final assault against the infections. Core systems, while galactic forces provided support and logistics for the largest military operation in recorded history. "Welcome back to galactic civilization," the Prime Resonator announced, though his tone suggested the welcome was grudging at best. "Thank you," Admiral Hyojin replied. "But we are not the same species you remember, and this will not be the same galaxy when we are finished saving it."